Okay, next we have Dr. Jess, who is currently working as a lecturer in the Department of Management at the Monash Business School. She's over 20 years experience in university teaching, specialising in management, entrepreneurship, creativity and innovation globally. She brings extensive experience in face-to-face, blended and fully online modes, as she will highlight today. Welcome, Jess.
Hi, everyone. Just going to share my screen. Yep. Okay. So thank you very much, Joan, for the introduction. And I'm really very excited to share my experience using FeedbackFruits to all of you. I've only used FeedbackFruits this semester, so I'm a fairly new user. As Max mentioned earlier, Monash University is one of the universities that they just started developing a pilot testing arrangement with. And although quite a few units in the university were earmarked for piloting FeedbackFruits, when the, I guess, COVID-19 pandemic came, I guess a lot of my colleagues decided not to go through the trial because we all had to make changes to our units and push them in the online space. So I guess some people thought it was too much. But I persisted. I'm one of the crazy ones in the university that persisted, and I've had a relatively good experience with it. So I'm going to talk to you about my experience with FeedbackFruits in my unit called Introduction to Management. So MGC 1010, or Introduction to Management, is a first-year unit in the Bachelor of Commerce degree at Monash University. Although it is a first-year unit, it's only about a little over half of my students are actually first-year students. So I get quite a lot of second, third, and even fourth and fifth year students taking the unit as a core unit in the Bachelor of Commerce degree or as an elective. So we get about an average of 650 students a semester, and they come from double degrees, which means we get students not only from the business school, but also from engineering, IT, science, arts, and law. So it's really quite a mixed bag, and hence it was actually quite tricky having different year levels of students and then students coming from different faculties. So it really builds the level of complexity in terms of delivering the unit to the students. We've made a major change to the unit and flipped all of the content last year. We were in another pilot project together with University of Queensland. So we've developed this first year Introduction to Management unit curriculum that's common across both universities. So their first year management unit is exactly the same as ours. And we've had the development of the content was assisted by the Monash Education and Innovation Unit, who is also supporting the piloting of the FeedbackFruits. So essentially, the redesign of the unit came about because of the feedback from the students. A lot of them said that, you know, it was very theoretical in the approach, and some of them can't see how, even though management is a practical subject, how that applies to the workplace. So hence the unit redesign reflected a more application focus, with the assessment regime being case study focused and scaffolded to allow students to develop analytical, research and report writing skills. So I'm glad Tiffany and Catherine mentioned earlier that there's the recognition of the importance of employers placing on the teamwork skills that students should have. So we've also included the development of teamwork skills in the learning objectives of the unit, so it's explicit, and we embedded group work in the unit, so both in assessments as well as the weekly activities that they have to do in class. So if you look at this picture, this was a panorama picture of our classroom last semester. So as you can see, all of the students are seated together in groups. The classroom that we use is very much conducive for collaborative activities. It's in a flat floor space, and you know, the tutor or the facilitator moves around quite freely. You can see that there's a buzz in the classroom, people are engaged. And you know, the students are also allowed to use their electronic devices, which I think helps making things more engaging. So before we started using FeedbackFruits, these were the materials that we have. We've got case studies from Harvard Publishing. The students used to download the PDFs and then they print it out or annotate it using their electronic editors on their computers. We had a marking rubric, which the facilitators printed out and then completed during the classroom as they go around each group, listening into the discussion. And part of the marking rubric was looking at the contribution of each team member into the discussion of the team and the completion of the output. So the output is the third picture here, which is the worksheets. So they're associated questions or tasks that are related to the case study reading that they had to do for that week. So because of the social isolation measures implemented by the university, we've now moved all of our teaching online. So we run 2-hour workshops using Zoom. And thankfully, because our unit was flipped, we didn't have to worry too much about transferring content to online. So we run 2-hour Zoom sessions, and the students are doing the discussions in their teams. So instead of physically sitting together on a table, they're in breakout rooms. So we break them up into groups of 5 or 6, and then they go into their individual breakout rooms for every class to discuss and complete the activities. So in terms of the actual activities in the workshop, there hasn't been that much change. However, if you look at actual use of FeedbackFruits, that has actually transformed the way we help the students engage with the study material. So Max said earlier that, you know, we're trying to move away from a passive experience, and certainly with FeedbackFruits, particularly the interactive document, we've tried to make it more active. So we activated the study materials in such a way that we used some of the features. So one of them is comment. So I'm able to indicate, let's say there's a terminology in a passage that I wanted to explain a bit more to students. I can do that using the comment function. And then for, I can also embed MCQ questions. So in most cases for the case studies, I just ask questions that kind of hint to students, you know, that in the case it says this, what is this an example of? Just for the students to associate a real life example to a concept or a theory that we're covering in the pre-workshop materials. So another function that we use in FeedbackFruits is the discussion points. So I only discovered this function about 3 weeks ago, and I thought it was a great function, and I wish I had figured it out earlier. So in the discussion points, I can put a prompt. It could be a question, it could be a comment, it could be a quote from the case study, and what the students would do is they'll just comment on it. They'll reply to the question or comment. And it's amazing how well the students have been commenting on these discussion points. So in fact, I think this works better than the forums in Moodle. So we use Moodle as our LMS, and students don't engage like this in discussion of content in Moodle, but they do in FeedbackFruits. So I think this is really a good way of using the tool. So I've set the interactive document with only 2 parts of the criteria. So when the student views the document, they get 10 points for that. And then if they answered all of the practice questions placed by the teachers, they get 90%. So I don't actually consider the actual scores that the students get on the MCQ questions or discussion points, because for me, it's more important that they've actually gone through the case study and answered the questions. I find that compared to last semester, the students this semester, when they come to the workshops, they're a lot more prepared in terms of the quality of answers that they provide to the questions, and the level of detail that we get for the responses for the worksheets, for the team worksheets, is much, much better as well. So I think part of that is because they've actually read the case studies and are able to associate the necessary or relevant theory or concepts based on what they get from FeedbackFruits. So the other tool that we use is the group evaluation tool. So in the group evaluation tool, we've developed a rubric for the students. So because they work on an assessment, the worksheet as a group every week, we thought we had the choice of either doing a group evaluation periodically, like every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, or we could get them to do it every week. We decided to do it every week because we felt that it would be a good opportunity for students to learn from feedback from colleagues, from their team every week, so they can improve on their performance. So we developed this rubric, so it's very clear to the students what their peers are assessing them on and what the criteria would be for the different categories of the performance. So the grades would appear like this. So every week the student would get a score from each of their teammates and it would be summed up. We set up a group evaluation as an anonymous system. So the students don't get to see who gave a specific mark or a specific comment to them. However, we feel that given the feedback we got from this semester, we might change that for future iterations of using the tool. So we found that in instances, sometimes because the feedback was anonymous, students didn't always give good quality feedback because they're not accountable for the quality of their feedback. It can't be attributed to them. So some completed the group evaluation because they had to do it. And in some cases, students didn't provide good qualitative feedback, even though it was an option. We also conducted the survey. Monash Education Innovation conducted the survey, and they found that students needed more instructions on how to use the group evaluation tool. So some of them found it a little bit more confusing, particularly the ones that have never done peer evaluation before, which is a fair number of our students, probably at least maybe half, okay, because they're first year students and they don't really do peer evaluation at school level. So most students who completed the survey indicated that they used the feedback to determine whether they had to change their behavior during the group activities, and in some cases allowed them to reflect on how what they do is perceived by others. So it's getting that consciousness that, wait a minute, I have to be mindful of what I do because other people are going to be able to assess my contribution. So I guess in some ways it's starting to get the students to reflect on their own practice. The main concerns students cited in the survey related to the subjectivity of the group evaluation process. So even if we gave them a very objective rubric for them to assess, there was still that perception of subjectivity. So it's really important, I guess, to get the students used to the mindset of evaluating others, and that having that criteria makes it more objective. So we've had a few instances when students came to me saying that some of the group mates exacted revenge on them. So earlier there was a question about, you know, what do you do if somebody was given a low score, even though they did well? So when conflicts like these arose, we go back to the original document. So we used Google Docs for the students to complete the assessment every week. And in the Google Docs, you can actually identify who contributed what in the worksheet. So if students came back and said, you know, my teammates hate me, they don't like my guts, they gave me a very low mark, so we can look at the contribution there and we can make adjustments to the contribution mark if that was the case. So what did I learn from all of this? A lot. Well, first, unfortunately, if you're teaching with first years, you probably have to think about incentivizing things. I guess it's usually about marks. So you have to attach marks to get them to do stuff. It's a bit different when it's second, third, or fourth years. They kind of see the value in doing it. But for first years, usually marks are a great incentive. Second, you have to nag, especially in the beginning. If they're not used to evaluating their peers every week, well, you have to remind them to evaluate their peers every week because they'll forget. However, I found once you've done it for a few weeks, the students develop the habit, get used to the routine, and do it quite well. We also use the first week as a trial week, so students could actually get the hang of the tool without having to worry about the risk of doing something wrong. Give clear instructions, tell students how to use the tool and how it will be impacting their assessment or their marks. Think about the worst case scenario and work around that. So when configuring the grading, include marks for maybe completing, giving feedback, or writing the minimum number of review comments, and whether the student has reviewed all the received feedback. So you make sure you cover all your bases. Consider how tools can enhance your synchronous sessions. So we found that the group evaluation gave the control to the students, and as opposed to the facilitators giving the mark for teamwork and evaluate themselves or others. If you set it up right, you can forget it, meaning if you do it right the first time, it will flow smoothly, whereas in some cases for me, I had to make adjustments. And like any tool, it isn't necessarily perfect. So I've still got issues with grades from the interactive document and group evaluation not transferring 100% into Moodle. So we still have to make manual checks every week, but I'm thankful that I've got 10 teaching assistants that help me with administration. So it really is quite manageable. So thank you very much.
Yes, we're up to the next presentation. So unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions, but we do have some questions in the Q&A that we'll ask you to answer later.
No problem, thank you.
It does sound like you learnt a lot from your implementation of FeedbackFruits. Next, I'm going to hand over to Sheila McCarthy from Griffith University to introduce the next speaker.